Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Experience Kills. I'm joined by the one and only Richard.
I think there is another, at least one.
Well, no, there isn't. You're the only Richard.
Oh, well, it's good to know. I feel privileged. Hi everyone.
Yeah, should feel privileged. Because you are the balded wonder. So there you go.
Okay, knock me down. Build me up, knock me down. Get on with it.
And I am, as always, the guy you can never get rid of. I'm Ben, host today, as we take a look at an interesting little sort of RTS hybrid game that's out on early access at the moment on PC, but will be coming to console, and that's worth mentioning because this game focuses very heavily on controller-based interaction, and that is LornSword Winter Chronicle, brought to us by a little developer called Tower 5 with some ex-Creative Assembly alumni, so they've got some RTS pedigree, and I'll be honest with you, Rich, it really shows. This game is very cool and quite unique. Do you know what it reminded me of a little bit? And people are going to be like, what?
No.
It reminded me a little bit of Pikmin.
Oh, right, yeah, I can see that, yeah.
Because so in LornSword, you play as this kind of commander, you do quickly become a general, and you can build sort of selective buildings that spawn your sort of adds, your sort of additional enemies. But the whole idea is that you don't fight directly if you can avoid it, but you take troops with you into combat, and the way they sort of follow you and the way you can then deploy them to attack enemies is quite simple. It's quite easy to understand and to do. Like I said, it's all controller based, the interactions in the combat. They've clearly decided to try and pare back the complexity of a conventional RTS and make it more accessible. And what that means is you kind of just take with you these groups of soldiers into combat, and you kind of then just let them attack buildings and other units, and they do the work for you. But it reminded me of how the little astronaut guy, whose name I can't remember, from Pikmin, would take the Pikmin with him.
Captain Olimar.
And use them. Captain Olimar, thank you. And use them to, like, fight the enemies. I have no idea if it's direct influence on the guys at Tower 5, but it's cool to see that kind of mechanic being used in a kind of more conventional, it's very much a sort of fantasy set, sword and sorcery kind of world. Yeah, it was really enjoyable. I mean, your main character, I'm going to try and find his name, and he is the LornSword, and he's sort of fighting for this group of, I guess the LornSwords are like high level, high quality mercenaries, and there's this big in-depth story that's already quite well in place, and even in the early access of the game, which is, I think it's the first 2 chapters of the game, and you're basically fighting for the Empire, and your name is Corin Lankar, which should say a lot about, the kind of fantasy setting and fantasy vibe this game is bringing about. And you're all about fighting, and you're reluctant. You've been doing this a long time. You're beaten down. You're tired. At the start of the game, you're fighting for kind of the crappiest general in the army, where they've kind of stuck you in this like legion of kind of mediocrity. But you rise to levels of importance, and then there's sort of behind the scenes machinations going on within the different factions of the Empire, and they're deploying you to do certain things. I don't want to spoil it, because I actually thought, it's a very obviously inspired by sort of fantasy literature, the style of intrigue and infighting, and it's a little bit Game of Thronesy,
yeah.
And
just from the naming conventions, it sounds very much like that.
Yeah, no, it feels quite, heavily inspired by those types of fantasy novels and obviously TV shows. But the combat does feel unique. I mean, like I said, your guy isn't about direct combat. If you get into a big fight with lots of units, you can hold your own, you can swing your sword and stuff like that, but it's much more about bringing these forces with you into combat. And you also have this sort of magical ability, because you become this general in the army, you're given this sort of amulet, so you can conjure into existence, you can summon sort of elementals to fight for you as well, depending on what sort of structures you build at your base camps and stuff like that. So fire elemental, air elemental, stuff like that, you can then summon them into combat to help you if you don't have the units fighting for you at that moment as well. And they're just a good additional support, and they don't last for a particularly long time. So with your spawning of these buildings, there are MOBA aspects you might notice as well. I don't know if you noticed that in Richard from looking at the the videos and stuff?
That wasn't apparent from what I've seen, but I've only seen the trailer, so full disclosure, you're the only one who's played the game so far, aren't you?
That's absolutely fair, yeah. I mean, so basically it's not MOBA in the sense of adversarial combat between human players. It's MOBA in the sense that the way that the enemies, the way that your units and the enemies will sort of attack each other are a lot like ads in MOBAs. So when you're building these different buildings, and there's a small selection, so melee units spawning, ranged units spawning, things like that, they will then have pathing, so that they will then automatically, if you want, when they build up a squad that's large enough, send those units towards, say, an enemy base or towards an area that the enemy are coming from, and just engage in combat. So you get this sense that the battlefield is kind of always alive and going, in sort of regardless of what you're doing. So you can just leave them going as distractions. You can also tell the buildings to say stop sending the units, so they build up a larger force, and then you can kind of collect a lot of units at once and take them all with you into battlefield. What I was finding myself doing was like grabbing loads of units, running to the enemy, sort of deploying the units, running back, grabbing more units, deploying them as well. So it was like building up these big overwhelming forces and stuff like that if you want. So you can turtle. That is something you could do in this game, and you can build up your static defenses and then sort of all go at once and stuff, which is something I always love doing in an RTS. Or you can play much more of a sort of an ongoing, strung out sort of situations of battles where you're lots of smaller engagements and wear down the enemy that way. So there's plenty of strategy in here. I can't wait for this game to come to console, because I think it's going to be absolutely perfect on your Xbox and your PlayStation, and maybe even your Nintendo Switch, but I'm not sure a Switch would be able to handle this.
I don't think it's announced for Switch. I'm pretty sure it's Steam, PS4 and Xbox One for the moment, at least.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a pretty nice looking game. It's got a nice bit of, it's got quite a pulled back viewpoint, which takes a little bit of getting used to when you're controlling this small dude in the screen. That was maybe one of my criticisms of it was a bit that you actually can lose the character a little bit in the environment, especially in the larger melee situations. It can be difficult to keep an eye on where your guy is, but that's sort of indicative of how you should be playing this game. You shouldn't really be wading in with him. You should be thinking about him as more like your on-screen cursor. He's the character that's deploying units into the battlefield, so you shouldn't really be getting into too much direct combat with him. But yeah, it's got drop-in co-op mode, which I didn't actually have a chance to play, but I think would be perfect on a console, because I don't know what most people are like. I guess PCs are much more common in living rooms than they used to be. I'm old school, my PC is in my office. I don't really have it set up so that anybody else can play on it with me, but the idea that you have this instant drop-in co-op mode so you can have another person join the battlefield with you makes a lot of sense in a game like this, because you are often micromanaging and sort of really moving units around very directly in this game. So it's not a case of just clicking, it's moving them, like, dragging them to different enemy engagement points, and there'll often be different points on the map where the enemy are coming from and spawning in, so you have to really micromanage and tactically think about where to sort of get things around. So I think in co-op it might be a bit easier being able to split the load. So that'd be interesting to do on console as well.
What sort of co-op is that then? Like online or split screen or single screen?
It seems to be split screen. Like I said, I haven't had a chance of testing it out myself, but it is this idea of couch co-op, to work together to effectively deal with the enemy units themselves. And I think that's perfectly suited for console gaming, maybe not for every PC gaming use, as it were. Yeah, but no, I really like where this game is going. Obviously, like I said, it's early access at the moment on PC. They're talking about it being in early access for 4 to 6 months. I'm guessing after that the plan is to get it onto consoles, though of course there are early access models on console as well, so it might come sooner. I think there's some really nice graphical touches in this game, like when you're trudging through deep sand and deep snow, it leaves trails and footprints behind you, which isn't something you'd necessarily expect from a sort of an RTS or MOBA game.
Well, that's something I picked up. I mean, for an RTS it does look really pretty, and there's a great amount of detail in there that caught my eye. And the soundtrack too. It sounds like it's got a really accomplished soundtrack.
Yeah, no, it's the sound design is good, the voice acting is good. It actually feels like a quite polished experience already for a game that hasn't even been fully released. I think the main thing is that they're just sort of releasing these chapters in stages, but I think they're coming out fairly complete, and they want to polish things up, and get it as honed as possible. I really like how the controls are mapped really nicely to the controller. It doesn't feel like at all as good on PC and mouse, and that says a lot. Obviously this game is very much going to be at home on a console. I really like the direct control method. So even when you're doing things like telling buildings to say hold the units, you're doing that all in game as your character walking to the building, like toggling a flag on it, rather than say just bringing up a menu or big radial menu as you often see in console based RTSs or strategy games in general. So it just feels much more like an action game.
Yeah, I guess with traditional RCSs, in my experience, it can feel quite disconnected from the action because you're like literally elevated away from it. But yeah, having that sort of hero unit that you're in control of, directing the battle, that sounds much more engaging to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to keep an eye on this. I'll keep you guys updated. Hopefully, the main thing I want to check out is if this comes to consoles. I'd definitely be keen to check that out then. But it's early access. It's still getting developed. Keep an eye on it. Tower 5 seems to have done a really good job with it so far, though. You can see the pedigree of where they've come from, Creative Assembly and stuff like that. And that sort of brings us to the end of this little early access episode of Experience Kills. Cool. Yeah. How do you feel about it, Richard? Any other questions or anything?
Well, I came into it hoping that this was not about medieval gardening equipment, which the name implied. But yeah, pleasantly surprised by that. Looking forward to seeing it come out on consoles.
Okay. The other kind of lawn. I see what you're doing there. That was it's very.
I've been holding out for that for like 10 minutes.
Okay. That's why I asked. I knew you had a dad joke waiting. So he's been Richard, and you can find him if you would. I want to. I don't really know why you would. He's on Twitter at Colonel Red. If you want more dad jokes, perfect place for that.
Yeah, do that.
Or politics, actually.
Mainly politics at the minute.
Mainly politics. You can find me at DIYE on Twitter. Obviously, you can find Experience Kills at Experience Kills on Twitter. We're also on YouTube, and you may have watched this on YouTube. You may have listened to it on Audible sort of version, which we might have been on Spotify or on iTunes or all those other places that you can find a good podcast. But if you are on YouTube, we would love a like and a subscribe. That really helps us get the word out about, just cool games more than anything. And we'll be back soon with more exciting Experience Kills. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers.
You have to edit that out now.
I'm waiting for you to shut up.
Sorry.